Welcome back, guys. We're going to do another book review off the cuff today, and it'll be the first work of fiction for the year. I actually started the year doing regular fiction, and then of course we went down this road the last several weeks, but in January I did read two fiction novels before turning on to tutor, I guess, Plantagenet and tutor English history, and so today, since I'm not finished with the two that I am currently reading / listening to, I'm going to do the first work of fiction for 2023 for me. I ended up getting the new book by Grady Hendrix, horror author. It was on the New York bestseller list, and so I decided to pick it up and kind of start the year with that. So we're going to look at How to Sell a Haunted House. This was the first Grady Hendrix novel that I had ever read. I know he kind of came onto the scene in 2014 with his, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, although he did have a little bit of a cult classic with My Best Friend's Exorcism as well. So I knew who he was, I just never read anything from him. From South Carolina, Charleston, his novels are written around that area. This one and the last one, which will probably be next week's review, because I ended up reading this one and then going back and reading the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. They're both written around Mount Pleasant. He even made a statement one time that this book was kind of written from the children's point of view, and the last one was the parents' point of view. As far as that area, they were the same area. He mentions the same streets. However, we don't really have the same characters. So this one was a first for me, and I think what I would first say is it's a little bit satirical and funny and spooky, and ultimately well written. I think the dialogue was a little bit wanting for me. However, I respected what he wrote. I liked that he approached horror in this little bit of a different way, right? And ultimately did enjoy the book. This one was just under 400 pages, and again, and I'm just kind of comparing the two because I did go and read the other one, like I said before, the big one, which was Grady's first New York Times bestseller. That one was written in the 80s. This one's written a little bit later. I will say, if you have, puppets, any taxidermy on the wall, dolls, masks, definitely put those away before you start reading this book. I am absolutely not a fan of dolls whatsoever, and there were a lot of dolls. And so essentially what you have is a brother-sister, brother in the hometown, Mount Pleasant, just outside of Charleston, South Carolina, stayed there. Daughter left San Francisco, I believe. You have to forgive me a little bit because I know this is a few months old now. But again, I wanted to start this series, and so I didn't have a new book that I had finished. So I went back, like I said, it's kind of going to give me a little bit of a buffer until I can finish probably finish the 6 Wives of Henry Tudor first, as we're finishing up our English history. So again, Sisters in San Francisco comes back. I would call her a little aloof. She has a young daughter with a boyfriend she did not end up marrying. So of course, anyone that is from the South, like myself, would again, am already being looked at in a specific way, I would say, or a certain way maybe. And so she has a little bit of trepidation going back, and so he starts the book explaining this. About the main character and saying, this is why we've not been back in so long, but parents did support her. So anyway, we get the call that now the last parent, is dead. And what was interesting was they were close apart. Or, sorry, they were close together. Dad was being rushed to the hospital for some unknown reason, and both were hit and killed. So Mom was taking him to the hospital, and they were hit and killed. And that basically sets up the foundation of our narrative. And so the daughter is coming back to take care of the funeral arrangements, because it is seen, since this is the way she is presenting it, as the only responsible adult left in the family. Yeah, she has some aunts. She has cousins. Again, typical Southern culture when it comes to that, even in the way that Grady describes their characters in looks and mannerisms. And so, of course, then her brother, because of what she's telling us, is this loser who never finished college. Everything and anything that he wanted to do, Mom let him do. He was the special child, if you will. He's the younger child. And so she is not looking forward whatsoever to coming back and dealing with this, both with her parents' home, her childhood house, going through all of that, getting that ready to sell, on top of dealing with her brother. And so we kind of crescendo into this back and forth until we reach the funeral stage, wherein one of her cousins, who is a testate attorney, is presenting the will to her and her brother. And by way of a very, very small loophole in the will, because the parents died very close apart, and I mean hours, because Mom did survive for a few hours, that we have this situation now of where the brother has actually gotten control of the house and the assets. And so again, that's our snowball, and then we just start going downhill. And in doing so, what we find out is that the main character, the sister, the daughter of these two, really begins to have memories come back that she has repressed, we'll say it that way, over the last several years. Once she left this area and went to college, and then very sparsely came back, with help of the brother, with help of the house, I'll put it that way. She begins to relive things that she had completely forgotten. And you have this main antagonist that is a hand puppet, okay? And the hand puppet, she remembers as being first just a turnoff, being a little bit scared. She goes back into the house. The house is empty. The house is different. It feels different. All these dolls were put up or out on display because her mother was actually this preacher, priest, some sort of minister of a faith that was Christian, but it was a puppet church sort of thing. So she has them displayed all over the home, and we go back into this house, and they're literally, looking at her and staring at her, and she sees this one, and this one, we'll say, is placed in different areas, posed to do different things. These several times that she goes into the home over the course of going through the funeral, like I said, having the will read out, and then ultimately having to stay behind to get the house ready to be sold. And so that's kind of where we are, and she goes into her childhood bedroom and we start going down memory lane with her in her mind and how she remembers it. And then basically what ends up happening is She is so aggravated at her brother. They are arguing so much so that one night she thinks she's going to trick him. And what I mean by that is to trick him into getting this sooner rather than later ready to sell, even if it is not as much profit as what they were originally thinking, simply because she wants to be done with it and she wants to go back home. She wants to be done with him. And in doing so, they end up experiencing things in this house together wherein he's like, oh, you don't remember what happened at this age and this age and this age, and you actually tried to kill me. And she, begins to remember, and she's like, that wasn't me. She had an imaginary friend that just so happened to be a character inside of this hand puppet. So when she put it on, and essentially we find out that the hand puppet is possessed. And I think I'll leave it right there as far as what ends up happening. So there were a lot of chuckles in there, a little bit of strangeness, which I think is a good thing when you add chuckles to it. Not a whole lot of serious writing, and I think that was a good thing. I've read many horror writers that took the subject very seriously, almost too seriously, or like I've told you before, some Stephen King stuff reads like literature. Some of his early stuff, and Grady was not that way. And being, I think, 2 years younger than him, it really resonates with me. I think the way that he's writing, because he references a lot of culture when we were growing up in the '90s, and so even Stephen King references, and so it becomes very relatable, albeit a little campy. But again, I'm okay with that. We grew up seeing the Freddys and the Jasons and the Mike Myers and the Leatherfaces, and so campy is okay. There are authors that can take campy and turn it into good campy and take you away from what you're reading, and then Grady does this with a little bit more of a pizzazz and a little bit more dry humor, and I really like that. So I enjoyed the book. I think the book for me, again, the dialogue was something, and I think with dialogue, what I mean by that is not that it wasn't developed. It was developed, very readable, very easy to read, but it was a little bit on the nose at times, and forced in the way that we were anticipating what was being said, or the responses were just a little bit generic to the point it was like, come on, you could have thought that out a little bit more thoroughly, or just not put it in, right? Not put that response in. It could have went on. The story could have went on. So the dialogue didn't stop the story, but there were times when I would stop reading after reading dialogue and kind of roll my eyes a little bit. That could have totally been on purpose for him. He might have done that for very specific reasons, because when we review a Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, some of that comes across in a different way, because remember, these are mothers of children growing up in the 80s. So again, totally relatable. We can tackle that next week. But this being the first and his newest, I liked it. I felt like he had developed a lot over 2014, right, when this the Southern Book Club's Guide came out and became his first bestseller. Until now, I felt like he had grew quite a bit as a writer, and so very much appreciate that. Again, I like him. I will read more from him. I may even go back and pick up My Best Friend's Exorcism. I haven't seen it on Amazon Prime. I know that I think it's a movie that Amazon picked up, and they are making a TV show about the Southern Book Club's Guide. So he is becoming, more popular. And again, I'll kind of end it here, but I think it's worth a read if you want a little breakup in your horror reading. For me, a little bit of a laugh. If you grew up in the 90s, you'll recognize and little light bulbs are going to go off, and you're going to remember many things about your childhood. And he pulled on some stuff, some old 80s and 90s campy movies too, but in a good way, and just cheesy enough to make it okay. That's what I'll say. So I think for me it was a solid B, maybe edging into a B plus, but I would definitely do 3.5, teetering on a 4 for me, and I think that's solid. Looking at other reviews on Amazon now that it's been out for a couple of months, I think that's in line with what other people have said. And so I think it's a read. You won't be wild, but you won't be disappointed. All right, let me know what you think. Again, we're going to do this every week this year, and next week definitely will be fiction, and then we're probably going to go back into the old boring English history for a little while, because I am fascinated by that. And if you like Game of Thrones, read the real stuff. I've been avoiding it for years and years and years, but it's good. All right, guys, have a good one. We'll see you next time.